So I started at SeaWorld in 1992 at SeaWorld of Florida, and I worked there for almost 5 years in the mid-1990s. And I spent most of my time working at Shamu Stadium, a little bit of time, as do most trainers. I spent a little bit of time at Sea Lion and Otter Stadium, but spent the vast majority of it at Shamu Stadium.
Okay, and at the Florida location.
At the Florida location.
So that to me also was another reason. I was like, we need to do something for these animals. So I didn't feel like as a trainer that I could make the difference in their lives. That supposedly, you know, I don't think just the fact that they interacted with me really made their day better. Like it seemed like there was more that we needed to do. So that was my reason for leaving.
They're dealing with. I think I totally didn't answer your question. I don't even know what your question was actually anymore. No, it was good. It was good. Could I have you talk a little bit about, because that sort of leads right into family bonds in the social structure?
Probably since my daughter was born. I don't know, take naps or anything.
Absolutely.
How's she doing?
She's great.
Yeah.
She's a monkey. I'm gonna sit over here and listen.
Okay.
Is that okay?
What sort of got you into working with orcas? Was that your dream to work with animals, or what drew you to that job?
That's a great question. So when I finished my undergraduate degree, I worked for an environmental testing laboratory, and I was tasked occasionally with going out and doing water sampling, air sampling at various facilities in the Midwest. So I was living in Kansas City, not necessarily a hotbed for marine mammals. And so I went to this amusement park before the park opened. I was there at 7 o'clock in the morning or something to sample a small stream that kind of meandered through the park. And so I went into the park to set up my sampling equipment, and there was, and in retrospect, a really sad setup for the animals, but there was this little, basically a bathtub where there was 2 bottlenose dolphins in it. It was a rented show, and so I kind of looked around, and these dolphins were kind of raising their head up over the tank, checking me out, and I'm kind of looking around, and nobody was watching me because it was before the park opened. So I snuck up and I interacted with these 2 dolphins, and it was one of those things where it kind of did something in my brain, like, wow, maybe I should be checking out marine mammals somewhere.
The societies that we've been able to study in the wild, what we know is that they stay together forever, and they're very socially and emotionally connected to each other. And they are structured similarly to humans in that you have mothers who raise their young, but have other family members who help them. So there's a helping nature to them with each other. Some that are even designated little babysitters while the mothers go out and get food or whatever it is. And the females go through a similar a menopausal situation to humans. And most recently, there was an article that came out that talks about most likely the reason for that is so that they have a period of time in their lives where they're no longer giving birth to animals, but they're essentially serving as overseers of their family unit, and they're passing on information from one generation to the next generation and helping in that family unit stay together as a family unit. And in captivity, what you have is, as Jeff has mentioned, just this mix of animals from all over that have been put together and now are breeding. And yeah, I think
this kind of taps into the sort of Occupy Wall Street idea where people are kind of sick and tired of large corporations running roughshod over us. And that's exactly what this is. This is a large profit driven corporation that does whatever they want to do, and they tell you whatever they want to tell you. And I get the sense that people are sick of that. Mm-hmm. We're tired of Monsanto running the show.
Right.
In
which facility, what got you started and inspired to work with orcas and animals in general?
Right. I worked there for 8 years. I started in November of '87 and worked through December of '95. What got me going was
So the point that it turned for me, that I felt like that I became really, I would call myself anti-captivity, was the moment that Dawn was killed by Tillicum. I saw something on CNN probably within an hour or so after the news broke. I was watching an internet broadcast, and I saw the picture of Dawn Brancho lying down in the slide out next to Tillicum, and I heard the company basically blaming her for her death. I can't remember if the storyline at that point was that she had slipped and fallen, or if they've moved to the fact that they've moved to the idea that Tillicum had pulled her in. But for me, that picture of seeing Dawn, who I knew had been hired 6 months after I quit, so she had at least about 16 years of experience. I knew that here she was putting herself in a compromising position with an animal who'd already killed 2 people. I knew Tillicum's history, and I knew that what she was doing would have been not legal when I was there, that the position that she had put herself in with this animal was wrong. So I knew a lot of things immediately, that the company was lying about the situation, how she got there in the first place, and that they were lying about the fact that it was her fault because this animal had killed 2 people before. So that was really my wake-up moment. I think up until that point, I still had carried some pride about having worked at SeaWorld.
I think of a job that would kind of combine like athleticism with science, and so I was, I misinterpreted what SeaWorld was. It turned out to be a sea circus, but I thought, it would be like a bastion of research. I thought I'd go in there and we'd be doing some peer-reviewed science like JJ's fond of doing, and like we do now. But it really was just a circus, a big top environment with a little bit of a different structure to the stadium.
Totally, tomorrow sit down with them and try to help them make a better business model that's more focused on education and conservation, and that's all.
Right.
But they've been doing this for 40, actually 50
years
now.
Yeah.
So it's just what works for them, and they're cowboys, and they don't want to change because that's. But I mean, that if they put animals even in sea pens, some kind of controlled environment, they figure out a way to make money off of it.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What we know about mothers who are giving birth in the wild is that they'll give birth about every 4 or 5 years, and maybe have 4, maybe 5 calves over the span of 20 to 25 years. In captivity, you have animals that have are being bred every 2 years. So they don't have the natural period of time with their mothers as infants until, imagine in the wild, you're a baby orca and you have 5 years to spend with your mother. And you get to a certain point within your family structure and another baby might come along. Well, even Kalina, the first baby she moved, she was only 2 years old when she had another sister right there with her that her mother's attention had to be given to. So just everything about the family structures gets all messed up in captivity.
Just the people who I was interacting with, there was a group that was formed from, Tim Zimmerman wrote an article called Killer in the Pool that was printed in Outside Magazine, and he featured interviews with Dr. Ventre and Dr. Jett, and I read that article, and I became part of a online Google group that Tim and Jeff put together called Orca Aware, and I started interacting with journalists and what I would have called before animal activists, scientists, people who knew a lot more about these animals' lives than I did, and I just became more and more shocked. I was like, I don't actually know anything about killer whales. That was the conclusion I drew. That what I thought I knew about killer whales was not anything even remotely like what their lives were like in the wild. And then I started to take what I knew as an acupuncturist now, my understanding about stress and how it affects humans and how it affects their health. And I realized that a lot of what we were seeing and that what we were recognizing going on at SeaWorld is just what happens to humans when they're in a stressful environment and they can't adapt to it.
When you first get hired at SeaWorld, you're kind of in a honeymoon period. You're happy to get the job. Probably 1 to 5% of the people that apply for the job take a swim test and get the job. So the first year or two that I was at SeaWorld, it's kind of what I describe as a honeymoon period. But it was when I came back and interacted with Dr. Jett and other people, and we started to critically think about things that we were witnessing, for example, the broken teeth and the collapsed dorsal fins, things that we're writing peer-reviewed papers on right now. We were talking about back then. This conversation probably began in the early 1990s.
SeaWorld and other marine parks seem to have a history with breeding females at a very that would be abnormal in the wild as well, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we know that they're breeding them as young, attempting to breed them as young as 4 or 5 years old.
So that was really, it was kind of a longer journey for me to get to the place where I was willing to speak in public about what was going on. Jeff and John were really the first 2 people who stuck their necks out there, and so it wasn't until I was asked to go on Fox News. It was a Fox and Friends program, and they were wanting to have a discussion about one of SeaWorld was being pushed by OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, to put forth what they called abatement measures, like ways that they could protect the trainers if the trainers were going to go back in the water. And so one of their methods for protecting the trainers was to give all the trainers scuba gear. They called it spare air, and they are using it now. They just actually debuted the vest 4 years later. They've debuted these vests for the trainers, but the idea was that they would outfit these trainers with scuba gear, so that if they were pulled in the water or they were pulled down by a whale, or there was some kind of aggressive act during a show or during a training session, the trainers would be able to breathe, and somehow that would save their lives. And all of us who've worked there know that in most of the aggressive incidents we've seen with killer whales, the vest simply gives the whales something more to grab onto.
We're telling the public that we're providing them with superior dental care, but we're leaving out the part about how they broke their teeth. For example, we're telling them that dorsal fin collapse is a normal phenomenon, and yet it's not seen in the natural world that often. So these things became...
It's about 36 feet, so that's 2 atmospheres. So let's say you get dragged down to the bottom by a killer whale, and it's holding you down there, and you decide, oh, well, I need to breathe. So you take out your spare air, and you take a sip of air, and right at that moment, the killer whale decides it's going to whip you back up to the surface. If you don't blow out the air fast enough, you're going to have a lung overexpansion injury. So OSHA, there was a representative from OSHA who was speaking with us and wanted to get our perspective as former trainers, what we thought about spare air. Was it a viable alternative to protect the trainers? And Fox News got wind of it, and they wanted a former trainer to come and speak on Fox and Friends. I think it was September of 2010. So Jeff and John and Carol were not available to do it, and so 4:30 in the morning I went down to a TV studio in Anchorage and went live on Fox and Friends, and that's kind of where the journey started for me.
Okay.
Thanks. All right. Thanks for thinking of me.
You're welcome, sir. Yes, sir, sir.
Yes, sir.
They've come out and said we do not separate our mothers from their calves, and I think right there is certainly there's a level of semantics and not necessarily lying, but misleading the public with a statement like that. It is true. I don't think that they would remove a nursing calf from its mother, aside from for a short period of time to put them in another pool. But that just shows you how screwed up their notion of what's natural for orcas to begin with is, because they're not recognizing that the learning that goes on, just because an animal is weaned doesn't mean that they're mature.
What did you think of tonight?
I thought it was really good. For me, it was just great being here with all of you, and you can't go wrong, I don't think, when we start interacting with audiences or answering questions, and seem really organic, and it's pretty, as corny as it may sound, pretty fulfilling for me.
Well, that's good. C-Ray? What do you think? You did awesome tonight. You ready for a monkey?
There's this chick there, Katie. She rocked it. It was
That's right.
awesome. That was the best part.
Way to go, Katie.